The rain didn't just fall on scent. Jude's prep. It seemed to leach out of the gray slate roofs, soaking into the centuries-old brick until the entire campus smelled of wet earth and ancient wealth. I hated the place. I hated the polished oak staircases that creaked under my worn-out sneakers. I hated the stained glass windows in the chapel that cast jewel-toned light over students who wore $500 loafers. But most of all, I hated the administration building's basement, where the financial aid office was tucked away like an embarrassing secret. Miss Miller, Dean Vance, no relation to her, though they shared the same icy pedigree lineage, had said 3 days ago, sliding a sheet of cream cardstock across his mahogany desk. Your work-study hours at the library are being reallocated. You've been assigned to the academic probation grant. 4 hours a week peer tutoring. I had stared at the paper. I already work 20 hours a week between the circulation desk and the dining hall, Dean. Then you'll work 24, he replied smoothly, not even looking up from his fountain pen. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to settle your tuition balance out of pocket before midterms. That was how I found myself walking down the subterranean corridor toward study room B12 on a humid Tuesday afternoon. The basement was always freezing, the air conditioning humming like a low, mechanical throat. My fingers were stiff around the worn leather strap of my canvas bag, my knuckles raw from the cheap soap in the dorm showers. I took a breath, gripped the brass door handle, and pushed it open. The air inside room B12 was thick with the scent of French jasmine, expensive suede, and cold coffee. Sitting at the center of the long conference table, her legs crossed at the ankle, was Clara Vance. My stomach dropped into an abyss. Time didn't stop, it curdled. She looked entirely unchanged from high school. She had the kind of beauty that felt like a deliberate insult. Sharp, high cheekbones, dark, glossy hair that fell in heavy waves over the collar of her tailored navy blazer, and eyes the color of dark espresso, completely unreadable. In high school, Clara Vance had been a force of nature. She didn't just walk down the hallways, she possessed them. And for reasons I had spent 3 years trying to forget, she had chosen me as her primary target. It hadn't been simple name-calling. Clara was too intelligent for that. It was surgical. It was the whisper campaigns that made my lab partners suddenly request transfers. It was the accidental tripping in the cafeteria that sent my tray splashing across my only clean sweater while her friends laughed. It was the time she bought out every copy of the required literature textbook at the local shop, just so I'd have to beg the teacher for a spare. She had turned my junior and senior years into an obstacle course of quiet humiliation, driving me into isolation until I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. And now she was sitting 3 feet away from me, tapping a silver Parker pen against a leather-bound notebook. Click, click, click. "You're late, Chloe," Clara said. Her voice was smooth, low, and laced with that infuriating, effortless authority that used to make my throat constrict. "I'm 3 minutes early," I managed to say. My voice cracked slightly, and I hated myself for it. I grabbed the edge of the door frame. "There's been a mistake. I'm leaving." There's no mistake, Clara replied. She didn't look up from her notebook, but the clicking stopped. Advanced organic chemistry. Reaction mechanisms, stereochemistry, synthesis. I'm failing. Ask someone else. Ask a teaching assistant. Ask anyone who isn't me. I tried, Clara said softly, finally raising her eyes. They locked onto mine with a sudden, suffocating intensity that made my breath catch. The department head gave me a list. I told him I'd only accept the student with the highest GPA in the college. That happens to be you. I'll request a reassignment, I spat, my hands trembling as I tightened my grip on my bag. I'll tell them it's a conflict of interest. If you drop a tootie without a documented medical emergency, your grant gets revoked, Clara said evenly. She leaned back in her chair, steeled in her absolute privilege. Which means your work study ends. Which means your tuition grant is voided. You'll be packed and off campus by Friday. The blood drained from my face. You checked my financial aid file. I asked the dean. He's my uncle. Clara tilted her head, watching the color drain from my cheeks with a terrifying, unblinking fascination. Sit down, Chloe. We have 2 hours. A surge of pure, hot rage flared in my chest, burning away the fear. I slammed my bag onto the mahogany table. The heavy thud echoed off the concrete walls. You are an absolute monster, I hissed, leaning over the table, my face inches from hers. You spent 2 years making my life a living hell. You humiliated me. You made me feel like garbage every single day. And now you're using my poverty to force me into a room with you. What is wrong with you? Clara didn't flinch. She didn't pull back. Instead, her dark eyes dilated, her chest rising and falling in a sharp, shallow rhythm as she looked at me. A faint, almost imperceptible flush crept up her neck, disappearing beneath her crisp white collar. Page 64, she whispered, her voice tighter than before. Electrophilic addition. Start explaining. The first month was war. I resolved to be a machine. I spoke to her only in chemical formulas, drawing mechanisms on the whiteboard with aggressive, squeaking strokes of the marker. I didn't ask how her day was. I didn't look at her when she spoke, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the textbook or the board. I expected her to mock me, to make jabs at my faded clothes, my worn-out shoes, or the cheap instant ramen I ate between my shift at the library and our sessions. But she didn't. Instead, her behavior was far stranger. It was suffocating. Clara never brought her phone to our sessions. In a world where every student at St. Jude's was glued to their screens, Clara sat in room B12 with her chin in her hand, staring at me with a terrifying, undivided focus. When I spoke, her eyes tracked the movement of my lips. When I demonstrated a molecular model, her gaze followed the movement of my fingers. If I stepped closer to point out an error on her paper, I could feel the heat radiating off her body, catching the sharp, intoxicating scent of jasmine and rain that seemed to follow her everywhere. Your arrow pushing is wrong, I said one Thursday, 3 weeks in. My tone was clipped, icy. I reached out, grabbing the red pen from her hand to correct her line. My fingers brushed against hers. It wasn't even a full touch, just the briefest graze of skin against skin. Clara froze instantly. A sharp, audible gasp tore from her throat, and her hand went dead rigid. I pulled back as if I'd been burned, dropping the pen onto the notebook. "Sorry," I muttered automatically, my heart hammering against my ribs for reasons I refused to analyze. "Don't," Clara rasped. I looked up, ready to snap at her, but the words died in my throat. Clara was staring at her own hand, her breathing ragged, her cheeks flushed a deep, undeniable crimson. Her dark eyes were wide, glittering with something raw and painfully exposed. "Don't apologize to me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Not for touching me." "Clara, stop it," I snapped, panic rising in my throat. "Stop playing whatever bizarre mind game this is. I'm your tutor. You pay, or rather the school pays, for me to teach you chemistry. That is all this is." "It's not a game," she said, looking up, her gaze pinning me to the spot. "I don't play games with you, Chloe. I never have. You tormented me." I shouted, the fury spilling over. "You turned the entire school against me. You laughed when your friends threw my books in the mud. Because you wouldn't look at me." Clara stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floorboards. She slammed her palms down on the table, her knuckles white. "Because I could buy anyone in that school, Chloe. I could make anyone jump through hoops, smile at me, lie to me, pretend to like me. But you sat at the back of the classroom with your stupid books, and you looked right through me like I was made of glass." I stared at her, stunned into absolute silence. "I hated it," Clara whispered, her voice trembling with a terrifying, desperate energy. "I hated that I could control everything in my life except your attention. So yes, I made your life hell. I made sure that even if you hated me, even if you despised the ground I walked on, when you were in that building, you were thinking about me." The room went dead quiet. The air conditioning hummed. My pulse was roaring in my ears like a freight train. "You're insane," I breathed, taking a step back toward the door. "You are genuinely out of your mind." Clara closed her eyes, swallowing hard. The fierce, terrifying mask she usually wore crumbled, leaving her looking strangely fragile, almost small against the massive mahogany table. "I know," she murmured softly. "I know I am." After that day, the dynamic didn't break, it mutated. I tried to maintain my hatred. I nurtured it like a fire, reminding myself every morning of the tears I had cried in high school bathroom stalls, the isolation, the sheer cruelty of her wealth. But Clara made it impossible to hate her cleanly. She started bringing things to the sessions. Not grand, ostentatious gifts that I could easily throw back in her face, but small, terrifyingly specific items. A cup of black coffee from the bakery 3 miles off campus, the exact blend I used to buy when I had a spare $3. An original edition of a poetry book I had once mentioned offhandedly in a high school English class 4 years ago, left carelessly on my side of the desk. She stopped wearing her designer jewelry to our sessions. She began doing her homework in advance, working until her eyes were bloodshot just so I wouldn't look at her with disappointment when she got an equation wrong. It was an obsession, pure and absolute, wrapped in quiet desperation. And the worst part, the absolute nightmare of it all, was that it was working. The hatred that had sustained me for years began to warp, twisting into a dark, heavy friction that sat in the pit of my stomach whenever she was near. I found myself watching the way her dark hair fell over her shoulder when she leaned over her notes. I found myself noticing the delicate curve of her throat, the way her lips parted slightly when she was concentrating, the desperate, hungry way her eyes tracked my every movement. It was toxic. It was terrifying. And I couldn't stop thinking about her. The breaking point arrived in late October. A violent autumn storm had slammed into the coast, knocking out power across half the university. The basement of the administration building was pitch black, lit only by the low, amber glow of the emergency wall sconces. Rain slammed against the narrow, high-set windows like gravel. I was packing my papers into my bag by the dim yellow light, shivering in my thin, frayed cardigan. The session was over, but the weather outside sounded like an apocalypse. "The buses aren't running," Clara said from the dark corner near the door. Her voice was quiet, stripped of all its former arrogance. "The lower road is flooded." "I'll walk," I said, zipping my bag with a harsh snap. "It's only 2 miles to my apartment." "You'll get pneumonia," Clara said, stepping into the dim pool of amber light. She was wearing her heavy, tailored wool coat, but her hands were bare, trembling slightly at her sides. "My driver is waiting in the courtyard. Let me take you home." "I don't want your ride, Clara." "Chloe, please." I swung my bag over my shoulder and marched toward the door, intending to push past her, but she stepped directly into my path. I stopped, our chests nearly touching in the narrow doorway. "Get out of my way," I said, my voice shaking with a sudden, overwhelming mixture of cold, exhaustion, and fury. "No," Clara whispered. I said, "Get out of my way." I shoved her. I put my hands against her shoulders and pushed, intending to knock her aside. But Clara didn't move. She took the blow, stumbled back half a step, and then caught my wrists in her hands. Her grip was warm, firm, and desperate. "Touch me again," she breathed, her dark eyes flashing in the amber light. "Push me again. Hit me if you want to. Just don't walk away from me. Let go of me." I pulled against her grip, but she held on, her thumbs pressing into the sensitive skin of my inner wrists. "I spent 2 years hating myself," Clara cried, her voice breaking entirely, the composure she had maintained for weeks shattering into 1,000 pieces. "I spent 2 years watching you walk away from me every day in high school, knowing I had ruined any chance I ever had with you. Do you have any idea what it felt like to watch you be so kind to everyone else, so gentle, so sweet, and know that the only thing you had for me was disgust? You earned that disgust." I screamed back, tears of frustration suddenly stinging my eyes. "You built it. You made me suffer." "I know." Clara stepped closer, trapping my hands between our chests. I could feel the frantic, terrified hammering of her heart against her ribs. I was an idiot. I was a coward, who didn't know how to handle wanting someone who didn't care about my money or my name. I thought if I broke you, you'd look at me. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. She dropped her head, her forehead coming to rest against mine. The scent of jasmine and rain swept over me, thick and suffocating. I am on my knees, Chloe, Clara whispered, her breath hot against my lips. I am completely, entirely at your mercy. I will give you anything. I will pay off your tuition. I will disappear from your life. I will let you ruin me the way I tried to ruin you. Just tell me what you want. I stood there, pinned under the weight of her confession, my heart hammering a chaotic, dangerous rhythm. I looked at her. I looked at the dark lashes wet with unshed tears, the tremble in her lips, the absolute, pathetic ruin of the girl who had once ruled my world with an iron fist. The hatred was still there, a dark, smoldering ember in my chest. But wrapped around it, choking it, was a fierce, terrifying realization. I didn't want to run away anymore. I wanted the power. I wanted her. You really are obsessed with me, I murmured, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Clara opened her eyes, dark and wild in the dim light. I'm sick with it, she whispered. I have been for years. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled my wrists from her grip. Clara flinched, expecting me to turn away. Instead, I reached up, my fingers tangling into the heavy, expensive wool of her coat lapels. I pulled her down, bringing her face inches from mine. If I stay, I murmured, my thumb tracing the sharp, trembling line of her jaw, you do what I say. You don't use your money. You don't use your family. You listen to me. In this room, in my life, I am the one in control. Clara swallowed hard, a shiver running through her entire body at my words. The absolute surrender in her eyes was intoxicating. Yes, she whispered, her breath brushing my lips. Anything. And you're going to get an inorganic chemistry. A breathless, broken laugh escaped Clara's lips, a sound so raw and genuine I had never heard anything like it from her before. Yes, Tutor, she murmured. I didn't give her a chance to say anything else. I leaned up and pressed my lips to hers. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a collision, years of anger, resentment, dark fascination, and suppressed desire erupting all at once. Clara let out a soft, desperate sound into my mouth, her arms wrapping around my waist like iron bands, pulling me flush against her until there was no space left between us. She kissed me like a drowning person reaching for air, possessive yet entirely subservient, yielding to every push and pull of my hands. When my fingers twisted into her dark, silky hair, she groaned, pressing herself closer, surrendering every bit of her pride to the heat of my mouth. When we finally broke apart, both of us gasping for air, the ambient amber light caught the wet shine on her lips and the utter devotion in her dark eyes. I stepped back, smoothing down my cardigan, my hands surprisingly steady now. My apartment, I said, my voice calm, commanding, leaving no room for argument. Your driver can take us. Clara didn't hesitate. She picked up my heavy canvas bag, slinging it over her shoulder alongside her own, and held open the heavy basement door for me, her eyes never leaving my face. Lead the way, she whispered.